In this course, you will learn how to build cross-platform desktop applications in Python that can run on Windows, Mac, and Linux. This course will teach you the fundamentals of working with Qt to build GUI applications using PySide6. Daniel Gakwaya developed this course. Daniel is an experienced software engineer, and he's the creator of our most viewed course of the last year.
Hello guys, and welcome to this new course on PySide6. In this course, I will show you how to use Python and PySide6 to build great graphical user interfaces that run on desktop. That's Windows, Mac, and Linux. And you will be writing your code once, and all you have to do is to run your Python application on a different operating system, and that's going to run seamlessly. So that's the point of the course here, building cross-platform graphical user interfaces applications using Qt under the PySide6 umbrella. PySide6 is really a technology that allows you to mix up Python and Qt to take advantage of the foundation that Qt provides. And I may hear some of you asking, what is Qt? Well, Qt is a cross-platform framework to build graphical user interface applications, but it is originally written in C++. And PySide6 is a project that aims to give us the ability to take advantage of what Qt provides using the Python programming language. And this is really cool. If you are a Python developer, you can take advantage of what Qt offers without needing to learn C++. And that's a huge advantage you might want to take advantage of in your career as a Python developer. So this course aims at giving you the ability to build applications like Notepad here. You see, it is a graphical user interface. It has a bunch of menus and toolbars. We have a status bar here. We can type text here. This is one of the applications we will get a chance to build. And this is going to give you a foundation to really build any kind of application you might want in your career as a Python developer. Another great aspect of this course is that we try to take advantage of every opportunity to teach you how to use the documentation. So if you want to search for something, for example, PySide6 and Q widget, okay, you can come to your favorite search engine and search here. You will have the information on this component and you can learn about it. We will be doing this a lot in the course, and I hope this is going to give you the ability to even learn more on your own, because I can't really show you everything in a course like this, but this is going to give you a great foundation to build your own work on top of. The requirements for the course are not really that bad. All you need is a basic Python understanding. If you can work with variables, functions, if you can work with basic object-oriented programming, if you know things like classes, inheritance, you will have a good time with the course. The most important thing is really the strong drive and willingness to learn. So if you have a roadblock, for example, if there is something you don't understand, you should have the drive to actually try and go in a search engine, put that in a search bar, and really try to understand what is going on. Once you understand that, you can come back to the course. But you are not on your own. We have a community on Discord you can join to be together with other people that are going through the course. If you post a question there, I will try and help the best I can. And if you go through this course, you will have a strong foundation to build graphical user interfaces using PySide6. This is going to give you the ability to build graphical user interfaces for your existing Python projects. So if you are an existing Python developer, this is going to be a great asset for your career. Another thing is that the knowledge you get in this course is transferable. So if you learn to build graphical user interfaces using PySide6, the knowledge you gain is going to also be useful if you later choose to use another toolkit. For example, there is another project which is called PyQt, which also allows you to build Qt applications using Python. So if you go through the course here, you will have the ability to take advantage of that framework pretty fast because the API is the same. But the ideas on graphical user interfaces aren't really tied to a single graphical user interface toolkit. So once you learn the foundations, you can use other toolkits fairly easily. Okay, so now that you know a bit about the course, let's talk about myself here. My name is Daniel Gakwaya. I am a software engineer. I have been using Qt for a lot of years, and I happen to have a few courses on Qt on Udemy. Most of these courses are using C++ but I released a new course which is using Qt for Python. But don't feel pressured to take that course. If you want, you can take it. But this one on YouTube is going to give you enough to build a lot of things. And once you have that knowledge, you can go on and use the documentation to even learn more than I can tell you in a course like this. This is really all I had to share in this lecture. So let's stop here and start learning about PySide6 in the next lecture. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there. I would like to welcome you in this course and congratulate you on taking a step to become a better Qt for Python developer. Qt is a cross-platform application development framework. You can use it to write applications for Windows, Mac, Linux, Android, iOS, and even embedded devices. The way Qt works, you write your code once and recompile it for your target platform. So for example, if you write your application on Windows, if you want to generate a Linux binary, what you need to do is to recompile your code on a Linux machine, and that's going to give you a binary that can run on Linux. You can repeat the process on a Mac, and that's going to drastically reduce your development time because you basically write your code once and run it or recompile it for whatever target where you want to run your application. Now, Python is one of the official languages we can use to develop Qt applications. The main language for Qt is currently C++, but Python is quickly catching up under the umbrella of Qt for Python, or PySide6 as it is currently known. Again, going through Python, you can write applications that are cross-platform that run on Windows, Linux, and Mac. But currently support for mobile and embedded is in development. I wouldn't really use this in production, but there should be good progress in this area in the future. Now, if you talk about PySide6, some people are going to mention PyQt. What about PyQt? PyQt is another library which is available to let you write Qt applications using the Python programming language, and it can mostly do the same things we can do with PySide6. But PySide6 has probably a better future because it is under the official Qt project. So you can expect support for things like Android and iOS to go faster than PyQt. Another thing is that to use PyQt in a commercial application, you need to buy a separate license for PyQt, and you also need to buy another license for Qt. So if you really want to drive your cost down, it is beneficial to use PySide because you will be buying the license once, which is going to include Qt and PySide6. So that's something for you to consider, but I'm going to leave the decision to you whether you use PyQt and PySide. This course is not going to cover PyQt, but the good news is that once you have PySide6 mastered, it is going to be very fast to pick up PyQt because the APIs are mostly similar. What's going to change is what you import in your Python files, and you will be basically able to do the same thing. So whether you use PyQt or PySide6, that's going to be your choice. But we will be focusing on PySide6, and the API should help you to pick up PyQt if you happen to need that. Now let's head over to the Qt page on Wikipedia and see some information about Qt. It is a cross-platform application development framework you can use to write applications for Android, iOS, Linux. You can see a lot of things here you can write applications for using Qt. It was developed by these two guys, Harvard and Eric. And it is currently developed by the Qt company, the company owning licenses of Qt. It is written in C++. And what I want you to see is a bunch of applications that are written in Qt to kind of give you an idea of what you can do if you learn Qt properly. If you go down here, you see Autodesk Maya, which is a popular application for building 3D stuff. We can go down and find Krita here, which is a design software you can use to do painting and drawing, things like that. You can see Mathematica. If you are a scientist, you must know this. You can see OBS here, which is what I am using to record this video. You can see QBitTorrent you can use to download torrents and things like that. There are really powerful applications that are written in Qt. You can see VLC Media Player. You can see WPS Office, which is really cool if you want to do some office stuff. And if you go down, you will find a bunch of organizations that are using Qt. And there are some big names in here. You can see AMD, you can see Blizzard, you can see DreamWorks, you can see Panasonic, Philips, you can see Siemens and Samsung. You can see Tesla. There's a lot of big companies using Qt, and this should give you an idea of how powerful Qt really is. And you can be in the same league as these companies and these pieces of software if you learn to develop applications with Qt properly. And this course is a perfect starting point if you want to use Python to develop Qt widgets applications. Okay, one thing I want you to know is that there are two APIs when it comes to developing Qt applications. There is the Qt Widgets API, which provides components you can use to build graphical user interfaces for desktop. This is mainly targeted for desktop platforms, mainly Windows, Linux, and Mac. But there is a new API, which is called QML, which also englobes new devices like mobile devices and embedded devices, and you can use this to build dynamic and fluid graphical user interfaces that look modern and really feel like they are from our time here. But make no mistake, QML applications can also run on desktop, so you will need to do some research to decide whether you want to use Qt widgets or QML. But if you exclusively want to target desktop, I would still recommend using Qt widgets because it is a mature API, it is tested, it has been in use since the 1990s, and it is really powerful. So use that if you don't care about mobile or embedded. If you want to target mobile and embedded, please use QML. It is best suited for that. And one thing I want to point out is that this course is about Qt widgets. If you are interested in QML, please check out other courses we have on QML because this course is not talking about QML. I want that to be super clear. Now, if you decide to use Qt to build your applications, regardless of whether you are using widgets or QML, you will be writing your logic in some programming language. And the two official languages that are supported by the Qt company or the Qt projects in general is Python, which we will be covering in this course here, and C++. But this course, as I said, is about using Python to develop Qt widgets applications. So this is going to be our focus here. Using Python to write Qt widgets application that can run on Windows, Mac, and Linux. Another thing I would like you to know is that Qt is not just about graphical user interfaces. Many people can mistake it for that. Qt can be used for much more. If you happen to be using Qt already for a graphical user interface, you still have a window to take advantage of even more things from the Qt framework. You can do networking, you can do threading, you can write database applications, you can use tons of other utility classes that are provided by Qt. So if you are already using Qt, take some time to see some other things you can take advantage of. In this course, I will touch on some networking and show you how you can do some basic HTTP stuff, but that's not enough to really call yourself a network developer using Qt. If you want to really go deep, you will need to do more research, but this course should give you a good foundation on which to build even more cool stuff. Now, this course is going to be a perfect starting point for you if you want to build graphical user interfaces in Python using PySide6, obviously. But I think it is even going to give you a good foundation, even if you plan to use QML. If you are new to the Qt ecosystem, I usually recommend starting by Qt widgets, which is what we cover in this course. And from there, you will grasp the fundamentals of how to use Qt to write cross-platform applications. And that's going to really be easy for you to do that because you will be writing your applications on desktop. You will be able to generate applications that run on the same machine where you are sitting. Once you have the fundamentals, you can venture into QML. And the same fundamentals you get from Qt widgets are going to apply more or less in QML. QML is a declarative language and that makes it easy to pick up by designers. But this course is about Qt widgets using Python, and it is going to give you the fundamentals that are going to help you out, even if later you decide to use QML. That's the point I am trying to make here. Now, I will be preparing this course on a Windows machine, but that's not going to be a problem because Python and PySide6 run well both on Windows, Linux, and Mac. So you can watch what I do on Windows and try to adapt that to your operating system, and that's going to work really well. Don't worry about that. This course is going to work for you whether you are on Windows, Linux, or Mac. The requirements for this course are not really that hard. All I require is a basic understanding of Python and a basic understanding of object-oriented programming in Python. If you can use things like classes, objects, inheritance, and polymorphism, you will probably be fine with the course using Python here. The most important thing, in my opinion, is the strong drive and willingness to learn, which is going to go a long way if you come along problems. You won't give up easily, you will keep trying until you get the thing running here. But I will do my best to explain everything I use in the course. If you need a refresher on Python, please note this course is going to assume you already know Python, so make sure you learn Python first before you take on this course. Now, this is all I had to cover in this video here. I hope you found it interesting and you are encouraged and excited to learn about PySide6. We are going to head over in the next lecture and show you some of the cool applications you get to build as you go through the course here. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there. In this lecture, we're going to see how you can get the most out of the course here. And there is really no magic pill you can take to get the knowledge from the course. The tried and true way is to follow along, watch the videos, try to practice the things I do in the course, try to modify the code and make it yours, and that's really how you are going to get the most out of the course here. Another thing I would recommend is to use the Qt examples. So if you go to the browser, for example, and search for Qt examples, I think they have a lot of examples. You can browse to this link. They will show you tons and tons of examples. And this is a way you can get full running applications you can try out. Most of these are going to be for C++, but once you have the fundamentals in this course, you will have the necessary basics to try and understand what is going on here. If you go down, you see examples for Qt widgets. For example, if we open the text editor example here, or the model view example, you will see that you can build something like this. And this is something we even build in our course here. But that's going to be in Python. You can learn about the model view architecture. You can really do all kinds of crazy things through these examples here. So if you have an idea, come to the Qt examples, see if there is something similar, try to build on top of that. This is the best way I can recommend to even learn Qt by yourself without even needing a course like this. But if you are a beginner, the documentation like this can be hard to understand. You still need the basics. This course is going to give you the basics to allow you to take advantage of this. But start trying to browse through these examples now, see what you can pick up, or even identify the things you need to focus on in the course here. Once you have the knowledge, you can come back and use it. Another thing I recommend is to use the source code that is going to be provided in the course here. The link is going to be shared at each lecture, so if you want, you can go to the lecture, download the source code, and use that however you want. Another thing I would recommend is asking questions if you get stuck. The course platform provides a mechanism to ask questions, so you can ask a question. I will try to respond as best as I can, so take advantage of that if you get stuck. We also have a bunch of groups on Facebook and Discord. You can join and help each other out. That's a really good way to learn, to find people who are going through the same thing. Take advantage of all these channels to make the most out of the course here. I want you to be successful in using PySide6 to build cross-platform desktop applications. Now that you know this, it is time we headed over to the next lecture and started setting up the environment for building PySide6 applications in no time. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there. In this video, we are going to set up the environment that is going to allow us to build Qt for Python applications or PySide6 applications. And the tools we install should work on Windows, Mac, and Linux because that's the essence of Qt. Qt is a cross-platform framework that allows us to write applications once and be able to build them on different platforms. And in this course, we are interested in building for Windows, Mac, and Linux. So here are the tools we are going to need. We will need an installation of Python. Once we have Python, we will install PySide6, and we will need an editor through which we will be typing Python or PySide6 code. Later in the course, we will need Qt Designer, but I am going to show you how to install it later at that time. For now, we will get into the process of installing Python, PySide6, and the editor that we are going to be using in this course here. Another thing I should say is that you don't have to use Visual Studio Code. It happens to be an editor that I prefer because it's free, it's cross-platform, it looks and feels the same whether you are on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And I expect a lot of students to be watching this course on different operating systems, so Visual Studio Code is a good choice here. Okay, so let's start with Python here. If you go to your search engine and type Python, install, we will go to the python.org website and you will find binaries you can download for whatever operating system you are on. So if you hit download here, you will download it and install it like you install any other application. And when you are done installing Python, you should be able to go to your terminal, whatever terminal you have installed, and say Python. And if you see a message like this, it means that Python is installed on your system. Now we have Python installed. Let's exit out of this. Exit. Okay, we are done here. Now that we have Python installed, we need to install PySide6. And to do that, it's really simple. All you have to do is to open your terminal here and use the pip package manager for Python. We will be using version 3 here. So let's say pip 3 install PySide6. Type this on your terminal. If you hit enter, the tool is going to go to work and it is going to download and install PySide6 on your system. And at this point, we will have Python and PySide6 installed on our system. The next thing we want to do is to install an editor. And as I said, we will be using Visual Studio Code in this course here. So let's go back to our search engine and say Visual Studio Code download. This should spit out a link to the website for Visual Studio Code. And you can download and install for your operating system. I am on Windows at this moment, so I can download and install it on Windows, but you can do the same whether you are on Linux or on a Mac. Once you have this installed, you will need to open it up. If you open it, it's going to look something like this. And the first thing I want you to do once you have it installed is to install a Python extension that is going to make our life easier when working with Python code. And all you have to do is type Python in the search bar here. Let's make sure it is highlighted so everybody can see it. So we have this guy here. And I want you to choose the one that says Python here. And I want you to choose the one that says Python here. Okay, the one from Microsoft. If you click on it, it's going to say IntelliSense, linting, debugging for whatever in a Visual Studio Code. You will click on install and wait for it to be installed. And at that moment, you will be ready to start using Visual Studio Code to develop Qt for Python applications using PySide6. Okay, now that we have this installed, it's time to test it and see that it actually works. What we are going to do is to open a folder on our system. Let's go somewhere on my drive here. I have a folder. It is an empty folder. You can name it whatever you want. And if you go in, you're going to see that it is an empty folder. What we are going to do is to drag and drop this on top of Visual Studio Code. And this is going to open the folder inside Visual Studio Code. We are going to get a window that says, do we trust this folder? Yes, I trust this because I created it. So yes, trust the authors. And we will have something on the left here. And this is going to be where we see our files. And this section here is going to be the editor in which we're going to be typing stuff. So nothing special here. Let's go on the left and hover over these buttons here. You see, we see one that says new file, another says new folder. We want to click on the one that says new file. And in this window, we will type main.py for Python. If we do that, we will create a Python file here. And all we need to do is to put in Python code that is going to attempt to use the PySide installation we just brought into our computer here. Okay, so what we are going to do is to put in some code to test things out. I don't really expect you to understand everything we do here. All we want to do is to make sure that the environment works. We will have a chance to learn about all the things we see in this piece of code and even more. So let's put in an import statement. And this is just going to import Q application and Q widget. And these are classes we're going to be using to create our widgets application. After that, we can go down and say import sys. And this is going to import a facility that allows us to work with command line options in Python. If you know Python, you probably know about command line options. We can go down and create a variable app, and we're going to say Q application and sys args. And after that, we will create a window, and it's going to be a Q widget. We will show the window, and after that, we will start the application by calling the exec method. Okay, now that we have this, we can try to run it, but before we do, please make sure you have exactly the same thing as I do here. I would even recommend going to the GitHub repository for the course and copying and pasting this entire code here. Because at this point, you may not be familiar with these things like Q application, Q widget, and some people are going to introduce typos and have unnecessary frustrations. So I do recommend using the code as is here. So you can copy from the GitHub repository and paste in here. Okay, once you have the code in, make sure you save. So you can Control S on this, or File and Save. And after this, we will open a terminal window. We're going to come to View and say Terminal. And it's going to open a terminal window inside Visual Studio Code in our current folder here, which is a bit convenient. And we will type Python main.py. And if we wait, we're going to see a window pop up. And this is confirming that our installation of both Python and PySide6 is working, and we are ready to start learning about Qt for Python, and this is really cool. This is really all I had to share in this lecture, and again, the goal was to set up a development environment we can use to do what we do in this course here. We have Python 3 installed, we have PySide6 installed, and we installed the editor that we will be using throughout this course here. Don't worry about Qt Designer at this point because we're going to need it later in the course, and when we get to need it, we will install it, and you're going to see how cool all this is. We are going to stop here in this lecture, and I will see you in the next one. In this lecture, we are going to try and understand what is actually going on here. In the last lecture, we blindly typed in the code to make sure the environment is working, but now is the time to try and get an idea of what is going on here. Before we do that, we are going to go to where we saved our code, and we will copy the code from the last lecture and rename this 02 understanding the code. I think that's going to work better. And it's 02, not 01, so my bad here. And I am going to drag and drop this on top of Visual Studio Code to open that project. Now, if I hit on main.py here, you see the exact same thing we saw in the last lecture. We have syntax highlighting now. And the first thing I want you to do that is going to save you a little bit of time is to come to File and toggle Autosave. Okay, you're going to click on Autosave here. And now things are going to be autosaved as you type things, and you won't have to hit Control S or come here to say save. That's going to save you a bit of time. Now let's try to understand the code, but before we do, let's make sure it actually runs. So we can come to View, Terminal, and hit the up arrow, and this is going to bring back the command we typed the last time we ran Visual Studio Code. This is really cool. If you want it, you could type this Python main.py and hit enter, and Python, let's type that correctly. And if we run, we're going to see our window pop up here. Now, the code here, the first line is importing the components that we need. For this code, for this project, we need Q application and Q widget. And these are part of the Qt widgets module that comes as part of the PySide installation that we did. So this is really importing the components we need. And here you could either import sys or not import it. But I just wanted you to see that it is possible if you want to process command line arguments. Okay, so sys is a module that is responsible for processing command line arguments. And once you have them, they are going to be picked up by the Q application instance you have here, and you will be able to process them in your Qt application. So that's what the sys thing here does. Okay, once we have our sys thing here, we can create our application, and an application is really like a wrapper that is going to be englobing everything you do in your Qt application. So it is going to be the thing responsible for running your application and waiting for things to happen as you interact with your application. For example, if you click on a button, all those things are going to be happening under a wrapper that is this app object here. This is as simply as I can explain it. After we have our application, we will create our widget and we name it window in our application here. And by default, widgets or windows in Qt are hidden, so we need to show it. And after we show it, we will call the exec method on our application to start the event loop. And the event loop really is a while loop, something that keeps looping around waiting for things to happen. So for example, if we run our application, let's bring back our terminal and we run it again. So for example, if we run it and there happens to be a button in our application here, if you click on the button, the event loop is going to be the thing that catches that click you do on the button and it is going to respond. I realize I am jumping around here, trying to go as deep as I can, but that's the gist of what is happening here. The exec call here is going to start the event loop. So let's say that here. Okay, and this is really all that is happening here. Another thing I want to say is that if you have been working with Python, you may have seen things like this, calling the exec method with an underscore after the C. And let's try to run the code with this. So let's bring back our terminal and try to run again. And you're going to see that it is going to work, but you see a comment saying that this thing will be removed in future versions of Python, and they are recommending using exec instead. And this is coming because of older versions of Python that had problems with the exec command here. In Python 3, I believe this is going to work well. So the convention we will be using here is not to use the underscore. We will be typing exec like this, and you will see the same things on the print function you have in Python. So if you want to print something, you can say print, and it is going to print that, but you can also use an underscore. Again, this is something that comes from older versions of Python, but in this course, we won't be using these underscores here. Another thing I want to point out is that you can use the documentation to learn about everything you want about PySide6. So for example, if you want to learn about this widget thing we are using here, you can go to your favorite search engine and say PySide6 and say Q widget. And this is going to pull the documentation for Qt for Python. If you open this, you will have all the information about that thing. So let's see what they say here. You can click on more and you can increase the size of this because I like larger text. And it is the atom of the user interface. It is a base widget on top of which you can build a lot of other things. I do recommend reading up on this if this is your first time with Qt. So you can create a widget. A widget can have a bunch of components. You can create other widgets on top of this. But we will have a chance to learn about all these things as we progress in the course. But it won't hurt to take a moment and read about this and how you can use this in your Python applications. So this is all I had to share in this lecture, trying to shed some more light on what is going on behind the scenes. We are going to stop here in this lecture. In the next one, we will try and organize our code in separate files so that things are easier to work with. I will see you in the next lecture. In this lecture, we are going to organize the code in classes to make things a bit easier to work with. In the last lecture, we did something like this. Even if we didn't use QMain window, but the code looks strikingly similar. And here we will be using everything in the global scope. So we will be doing things in a single file. You see, we are importing sys here to be able to process command line arguments. We are creating a window, and this is a different kind of window that can have menus, toolbars, and things like this. And we will have a chance to learn about this later. You're going to see how it looks in a minute. Another special thing about this kind of widget or window is that we can give it a central widget. And that's what we want to do here to be able to use buttons. So we have the window here. We are going to give it a title using the setWindowTitle method. And after that, we will set up a button which is meant to live inside this window here. A button is something you can click on, you can give it the text. And once you have your window set up, again, we have the window. Let's try to draw this here. We have a big window. Inside the big window, we will have a button. And this button is going to have text here, press me. And this button is going to be within this window because of the setting we are doing here. That's how these things work. After we have the window, we will show it and we will start our event loop and the application is going to work. Now, some would argue that putting all the logic for these buttons and things in the same file is really bad. And we need to organize this. The first level of organization we're going to do is to extract the logic for the window in its own class. And we do that using the code you see here. So we will create a class in Python. The class is going to be named button holder, as you see right here. And it's going to be inheriting from QMain window. We will give it a constructor. And if you know Python object-oriented programming, this is not new to you. So we will have a constructor. And in the constructor, we will be doing the things we were doing in our main Python file. You see, we are setting up the window title, we are setting up the button, and we are telling the button to be the central widget for this button holder class. Once we have this class set up, we will create an object of it in our main Python file. Again, we have the application object. We created the window. Notice what kind of window it is. It is button holder. And this is going to create an instance of the class that we just set up on top here. Once we have the window, we're going to show it and kick off the event loop. And this is going to extract the logic of setting up the window and doing all kinds of crazy things in this class here. Some would argue that this is still not maintainable. It is bad. We see the logic for the buttons and the windows in our main Python file. Well, we can do even better and create a version 3 of our application in which we are going to extract the button in a separate file. So we can do something like this. We can create a file and name it buttonholder.py. And inside that file, we will put in the code to create our buttons and windows and all kinds of crazy things. Now, in the main file, what we are going to do is to import the things we need to use. We will import sys, import application, import button holder, and after that, we will be able to use button holder even if the details of this button holder class are not in this file here, and our main.py file is going to be a bit easier to look at, and this is the main goal of this lecture here, making it easier to organize our code in classes to make it easier to work with. Now that we know this, we're going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with this a little more. Okay, here we are in Visual Studio Code, and here is the code we will be using here, organizing code in classes. If you go in, you're going to see that it is a folder with the main Python file. So we're going to be starting from there. Let's drag it and drop it on top of Visual Studio Code to open it. And if you look, it is the same thing we had in the last lecture. Let's clean all this up. And we will put in the code for this lecture here. We will go on top and put in version 1 of our code. And to save on time, I am just going to paste in the code here and take a moment to explain it because typing it would really waste our time. I will type when I see that it is going to add value, but for now we just want the code here in our editor. So we are importing the things we need. We need Q application, Q main window, and Q push button. And now that you see these new classes that you don't know about, it is a good time to go to the search engine and try to learn as much as you can about them. So we can go to our search engine here and say Q main window. Okay, Q main window. And if we go and click here, and again, I do recommend reading as much as you can about this. This is a main window that provides a framework for building an application's user interface. And one thing that is special about this class is that it allows you to set up things like menu bars, toolbars, dock widgets, status bars, and things like this. And it is a really cool thing to have in your application if you need these kinds of things. So we are going to be using a basic version of this, but I do recommend reading as much as you can about this. So let's come back to our editor. So we have a main window object we are creating that is going to allow us to set up menu bars, status bars, and all kinds of crazy things. We are going to give it a window title. And down below, we are creating a button, Q push button. And again, this is a good time to come to your search engine and look for a Q push button. So let's do that. Okay, come here. You should really drill this habit in your workflow because it's going to allow you to learn more things than I could even tell you in a course like this. So the push button or command button is perhaps the most commonly used widget in any graphical user interface. So you can click on it and things are going to happen. And this is really how it works. This is how you create it. And you can connect slots to it, and you can do all kinds of crazy things with this button component here. For now, we are just interested in making it show up in our user interface because it is easier to work with. After we have the button, we will tell our main window to use the button as its central widget. Once we have the window, we will show it, and we will kick off the event loop by calling the exec method here. This is all we are doing. Now that we have this, remember this is going to autosave because of the setting we did here. You see autosave is toggled on. We can show our terminal, okay? And we can hit up to bring back our command, and let's make sure it is highlighted so everybody can see it. This is the command we have right here, python main.py. If we hit enter with this, this is going to show a window. And if we resize it a little bit, I want you to notice some of the things we did. We have our window title on top here. Okay, you can see it right here, and we set it up using this line here. And we have a button in the middle of the window right here. This is our button, and it is saying press me. You can see the text here, and it is the text we set up here. And I really want you to make sure you understand the relationship between the code you type and the things you see when you get to run your application, because this is going to give you a firm understanding of how PySide is working to give you the user interface you are seeing here. Now, we have the application here, but some of you might argue that it is really not well organized, to say the least, to have the window and button logic in our main Python file. And we will try to improve on this. What we are going to do is to comment out our version 1 here, and I am going to put in a pair of block comments in Python. This is how you do it in Python. You have 3 double quotes and 3 double quotes, and in the middle you're going to put in your code, and that's going to be commented out. And I can copy what I want to comment out. Okay, so let's put my code in here and leave the comment on top. This is a 1-line comment in Python. This is how you do it. And we will do version 2. And in version 2, we will be creating a separate class, but the class is going to still be living inside our main Python file here to do things in steps. We can go down and do our imports. These are the same things we have been doing for a long time. We will go down and set up our class button holder, and it is going to be inheriting the QMain window. We will set up our constructor, and it is going to be calling the parent constructor. And it is going to be calling the super constructor or its parent constructor. Now, this class is going to be inheriting from QMain window, so it is also going to be some kind of QMain window. In other words, it is going to have access to methods we have in QMain window. What that means is that we can say something like self set window title, and we will be stealing this method from QMain window and being able to use that in our button holder class. This is classic inheritance in object-oriented programming, so I don't need to say much about this. So let's put in our text. After that, we will set up our button because we have QPush button imported here. So let's say button equals QPush button, press me. And the next thing we need to do is to set up the button as our central widget. Again, we have access to the central widget method because this is a main window. It is inheriting from QMain window. Again, that's what you should understand here. So we're going to say self set central widget, and we will pass our button as the central widget. Okay, now that we have this, we can go down and do the usual thing we did on top. For example, we can even copy from what we did before. Okay, so we can create our application object. We're going to go all the way to the bottom. We're going to create our application. We want to create a main window. Now we are going to be creating a button holder. So what we can do is go on top and say button holder. So we will have our button holder here. And we will take out the line to set the central widget because we are doing that in our button holder. Now that we have this, I think we are ready to start running this thing. Again, we have our class, which is going to be wrapping around the logic to show the window and putting things inside the window. And we are doing all this in the constructor of our button holder class. This is really cool. Let's bring up our terminal window and make sure we can run this. And if we run this, what is the problem here? I think it is the self thing we are passing here. So let's try to run again. And now you see that we see the same thing we saw before, but now we have extracted the logic for a button holder and setting up the window and putting things inside the window in its own class. And this is really cool. Now, again, we can do better than this by moving this button holder class in its own separate class, or its own separate file, I should say. Let's do that. We are going to comment out this. Let's put in our block comment section, and we are going to move everything we don't want in here from this section into our comment. And what we will do is to create a new file. Let's copy the code for the button holder class here, and I'm going to copy that. Let's go to the left and create a new file, call it button holder.py. And inside this file, we are going to paste in our class. Again, nothing special here. We don't need Q application here because Q application is used in our main Python file, but we need Q main window and Q push button. We don't need sys imported here. Okay. Now what we need to do is to just copy the part that instantiates the button holder thing. Okay, we can do that. And for this to work, we need to import Q application. So let's do that. We can copy the line that does this here. And sys, I think we need sys here. I think we also need sys imported. Let's do that. And now we need to also import the button holder class. We are going to say from button holder, import button holder. And this is going to give us access to these things. And you see that all the dirty work to set up the main window and put things inside the window is moved in our button holder file. And this is really cool. This is what I wanted you to see. And we will be doing things this way going forward in the course to make our organization a bit easier. Let's show our terminal window and run to make sure everything still works. I think we still have something running here. Let's run, let's say Python main. And if we do that, this is going to run and we see our thing here. And our code is organized in classes. And this achieves what we set out to do in this lecture here. In this lecture, we are going to learn about signals and slots in Qt. And signals and slots are a mechanism that Qt provides to connect things. In other words, when something happens, we want to respond in some other part of our code. Suppose on the left here we have a push button and we want to do something when that button is clicked. The way we do that, we set up a piece of code that is going to respond to the right here. And when the button is clicked, Qt is going to emit a signal. This signal is going to be picked up by whoever might be interested in this button being clicked, and they are going to respond. The mechanism Qt provides allows us to connect signals to slots. And when you have made this connection, when somebody clicks on the button, the method that is responsible for responding is going to respond and do whatever it is you do in the body of that method. Suppose we are printing a message. Whenever you click on the button, we are going to print a message. Whenever you click on the button, we are going to print a message. And Qt provides a simple syntax to allow us to do that. Let's look at that. Here I have a piece of code, and what I am setting up here is a simple button. You can see that right here, and we want to respond when this button is clicked. We say that we want to respond in this piece of syntax you see here. So we say button, the name of the variable, we say dot, and then we say the signal that we want to respond to. In this case, the signal's name happens to be clicked. And once we do this, we are going to call the connect method on this. And when we say connect, we are going to specify the method that is going to respond to this button being clicked within these parentheses here. In this case, it happens to be button clicked. If you look on top here, we have this method. We are defining it, and in the body of this method, we are just saying a message. You clicked on the button. So this is what we are doing here. We are connecting a slot or a method that is going to respond when this button is clicked. And this is what does this connection here. So some of you must be asking, Daniel, how did you know that we have this clicked signal on our button? And this is another instance of where you need to use the documentation. So we are interested in the Q push button component. We want to see which kind of signals this component emits. Let's go to our search engine pretty fast. So let's close all this here, and we are going to say Q push button for Qt for Python. And if we do that, we will have the documentation for Q push button. If you click on more, it is going to tell you everything about this component. But what we really want is to see the signals that this component emits. And if we go down in here, we see synopsis, functions, virtual functions, slots. So this is a slot you can activate if you want to do something like this. But we don't see any signal from this component. And this is because all of these signals are coming from a parent class of this push button component. And that happens to be what you see here, this little thing called the Q abstract button. The documentation for Qt for Python is not really good. For example, we can't scroll around to see the things that are cropped off, but we are lucky in this instance, we can see Q abstract button. If you click on this, this is going to open the documentation for Q abstract button. If you click on more, it's going to tell you what this does. It is going to implement an abstract button, and all kinds of buttons we have in Qt are going to be inheriting from this button here. But again, what we are interested in are the signals that might be emitted by this component. Again, we see functions. If we scroll down, we're going to see virtual functions. If we go down, we're going to see slots we can activate. If we go down, we're going to see signals, and this is what we are interested in. So the Q push button component can emit a signal to let us know that it is clicked. It can emit to let us know it is pressed, it is released, it is toggled, and we can do all kinds of crazy things. We can even grab these arguments or these parameters and use them to do things in our Qt for Python applications. So let's go back to our slides. Now that you know where I got the information that we have this clicked signal, so we have connected to it, and then after we do this connection and start the application, when we click on the button, we're going to see the message from our method here, and this is going to be really cool. So we are just responding when we click on the button, and we know the syntax we use to do that, and this is really cool. We can go even further and grab the parameter that is emitted by the signal. For example, if you go back to our documentation in the browser, you're going to see that the clicked signal can emit a parameter to let us know whether the button is checked or not. We're going to take advantage of this and show you how to handle parameters and signals. We can go back to the slides. And what we are doing here, after we set up the button, we're going to make it checkable. And this is going to make it toggle its state whenever we click on it. So if we click on it first, it's going to be checked. If we click on it again, it's going to be unchecked. And it is really going to be simulating the behaviors we have with checkboxes. If you click on a checkbox, it's going to be checked. You click on it again, it's going to be unchecked. And it is basically going to be toggling between these two states. That's what we are simulating here with our Q push button component. But we are doing this because we know when it emits the clicked signal, it can also give us information whether it is checked or not. And we are going to be printing that state in this print statement here. So we are just going to say print, and we are going to print the data parameter that we get in this function here. And we are just doing the usual connection we did before. Notice we are saying button clicked connect, and we are activating the button clicked method whenever this button is clicked. And that method happens to be on top here. So this is something we can do. We can respond when something happens and grab the data that was sent to us by the signal and use that in our method. And this is really cool. Let's look at another example before we head over to Visual Studio Code and play with us. Here we are going to use a slider. So we will set up a slider component. And again, this is something we have in Qt. This is going to be something like this, where you have a slider that you can slide around to increase or decrease values. We are going to give it a minimum, a maximum, and a value. And whenever we move the slider is going to emit signals that its value is changing. And because I checked the documentation, I know that the slider has a value changed signal. Let's go to the documentation and really show you this. You should be able to find things out on your own in the documentation. Let's say Q slider. And if we open this up in another tab, we are going to see all about this component. You can read about this here, but we are interested in signals that it might emit, and we don't see. Okay, if we go down here, we're going to see that this slider is going to inherit a comprehensive set of signals, and among these signals, we have a value changed. Okay, if we click on this, we are going to see that this signal is going to pass a value to us, and we can grab this value and do things with it in our Qt for Python applications. So this is what we are doing in the slides here. We are grabbing that value, okay, and printing that out in our print statement here. And all this is happening because of the connection we did here. So whenever the value changes, we want to call this method to respond to the slider moving, and we will grab the current value from the slider and do things with it. Now that you know all this, and again, I realize it is a lot of information, but we're going to go through this step by step in Visual Studio Code, and I hope you are going to understand. So let's go there and play with us. Okay, here we are in Visual Studio Code. We have an empty folder in which we will be doing our thing. Let's grab and drag on top of Visual Studio Code to open this, and we will create our main Python file, main.py, and this is going to give us our starting point. The first thing we are going to do is to put in version 1 of our application here. And again, I am not going to type all this. We are just importing the components we need. We are setting up a method that is going to respond when the button is clicked. We are setting up our application object, the button. And we are doing the most important thing here. Let's take out the line and do the connection ourselves. So we are saying button whenever the button is clicked. And you see that we don't have autocomplete here. So we have to autocomplete the signal and then connect. That's what we do. And we want to specify the thing that is going to respond when this button is clicked. So that's going to be button clicked here. Now we have the connection made, and we are just going to show the button here. Notice that all we have in our application here is a simple button. So this is what we are going to see when we run this application here. Let's bring up our terminal window, and we will simply run this just like we did other applications. And when we do that, we see a little window pop up that is saying press me. So this is our button inside this window here. And if we click on it, you see it's going to print the message. And it is doing that because of the connection we did here. Let's close this and comment out this connection to show you that if we don't make the connection, we won't see this message when we click on the button, because there is no connection between this button whatsoever to this slot here, or this method, if I can say it like that. Let's run it again to see this going on. We have the button, and if I click on it 1,000 times, I'm not going to see a single message here, unless I come back in my code and activate the connection and run the application again. Then we will see the button, and if we click on it, we're going to see things happening as a response to the connection that we did here. This is really the syntax. Again, how do I know we had this clicked signal? I use the documentation. Let's go down and show you that you can also handle parameters or arguments coming in your signals. Let's comment this out. So we have this done here, and we will put in version 2 of our code. Let's go down and uncomment this. Let's take out my block comment here. And again, notice that we have a parameter in our slot here, and we don't have any mention of that parameter because the clicked signal is going to send it anyway. It is our decision to decide whether we handle it or not That's what we are doing here. So we have the parameter and we're going to be printing the checked state. And to be able to toggle between the checked and not checked state, you have to enable that on your button component. And that's what we are doing here, setting checkable to true. Once you have this, you can run the application and you are going to see that as you click on the button, it is going to be constantly toggling between the checked and unchecked state. Let's run this. We can go to View and a Terminal and run this again. But before we do, I think we need to kill the application that was running earlier. So let's clear and bring up our application. If we press Me, it is going to check. It is going to say checked true. We click again, checked false. We click again, checked true. And this is happening because a behavior that is built into this button component is that if you click on it while you have this property set to true, it is going to be constantly toggling between checked and unchecked. That's what we can do here. And again, the real intent in this example is to show you that you can handle parameters that come in your slots. And the syntax you use to connect doesn't really change. You decide whether you handle them or not by putting the parameter here. If you put the parameter in here, you can handle it in your application, depending on the data inside this data parameter. If you decide not to handle it, you can just take this out, and you're going to fall back to what we had in our previous example. So let's run again so we can show our terminal and kill the application that was running and start it again. Now, if you click, you're going to see that we are just going to see the message, but we don't see the state because we're not handling our parameter here. If we put it back in and say data, okay, and run again, I think we can run again. Now we are going to see the checked state because we are handling that in our slot here. I hope this makes sense. And I did the best I could to put in a bunch of understandable comments so that you can really understand what is going on here. Let's comment this out and give you another example using a slider, because that's a bit more interesting. So let's put our code in the comment block here, and we can go down below and put in our code. And again, we are just going to be importing the components we need. Okay, notice that we are importing the Qt namespace, if I can say it like that. We have our slot, which is going to be handling some data, but the slot is going to be responding to a slider being moved. And again, we talked about this in the slides. We have our slider. We want it to be horizontal. If you want, you can make it vertical, but it's not going to be beautiful. We have the minimum set. Again, I know about these methods because I am familiar with Qt for a lot of years, but if you are just getting started, your best bet is to use the documentation to read about all these things. For example, again, if you go back to slider, I think we have that somewhere here. You can see the methods that it has. Okay, so we have a maximum method to get the maximum. We have a method to set the maximum. You can read about all these methods to see things you can do with your UI components in your Qt for Python applications. And again, after we have the slider, we are connecting to the value changed signal, and we want our method to be activated whenever the value changes. And whenever the value changes, we are going to grab the current value, which is sent to us as part of this signal, and we will be printing that right here. If this is not making too much sense, maybe we can run the application. So let's go to terminal and run it. And this is going to give us a slider here. Okay. And if we move it, you're going to see things happening here. Again, you see that it was starting at 25. If we move it up, it's going to go to 27, 28, 29. It can go all the way to the maximum, which is 100, or we can bring it all the way to the bottom, which is 1. Okay, and we can move things around. You can use this component in your application and it is going to work really well. But again, the meat of this lecture here is to let you know how to make connections between signals and slots. And I hope you know how to do this right now. This is really all I had to share in this lecture. I hope you found it useful. We are going to stop here in this one, and I will see you in the next lecture. I would like to welcome you in this new chapter where we are going to be exploring Qt widgets. And the widgets are really the basic components you use to build your user interfaces. And in Qt, these are going to be coming from the Qt widgets module. We will have a chance to look at Q push button, Q line edit, and all these widgets you see here, and they will allow you to build cool user interfaces. Without waiting anymore, let's head over to the next lecture and get started. In this lecture, we are exploring the Q widget component we have in the Qt framework. And this is a fundamental component in building user interfaces, in that it is going to give you a base window on top of which you can do all other things. So for example, if we set up a Q widget component and show it, we will have a bare window. And on top of this window, we can really build any kind of structure to have all kinds of crazy user interfaces we might wish for in our Qt applications. And to use this, it's really simple. Now you have the fundamentals of how you do things in Qt for Python. Here I am going to show you a simple example, and this is a class that is going to be living in its own file. The class name is rockWidget. It is going to be inheriting from QWidget, and QWidget is really the base class that we can use in our Qt applications. It is going to have a constructor, and in the constructor we're going to be doing our basic work here. Another thing I am going to show you in this lecture is how we can use layouts to lay things out nicely. This is really not the place to introduce layouts, but we really need them to have the flexibility to lay things out flexibly inside our widgets. So that's why I am doing that here. You also see that we are having a bunch of components. We have a bunch of buttons. We are doing connections to slots, and we want to respond when these buttons are clicked. And in our code, we will also set up these methods that are going to respond. Once we have the widget, we are going to display it in our main Python file. And here you see that we are doing the usual. We are importing the file that contains our rockWidget class. And we are setting up a widget, which is an instance of our rockWidget component. We are showing it and kicking off the event loop to have our application show up. Now that you know these things, we are going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with us step by step. Okay, here we are in our Visual Studio Code editor. I have an empty folder which is going to be containing the source code for our example here. Let's drag it and drop it on top of Visual Studio Code to open it, and I can create my main Python file. And in here we can do the usual. We can import the things we need. We can also import sys, set up our application object. And we are going to say window equals QWidget. We are going to show the window, and we are going to say app exec. Okay, to start our application here. Notice that we say Windows here, and we don't have QWidget imported. And we can import that here, QWidget. It is part of the widgets module in PySide6. And if we do this and run the application, we should see a widget pop up. Let's show our terminal so that we can run the application easily. And we can go up until we find the command to run this. And you see, this is going to pop up our widget. Nothing special here. What we are going to do is to move the logic to set up the widget inside a separate class and have that widget as a base on top of which we can build other things. So let's do that. We are going to create another file. We are going to call it rockWidget. And in that file, we are going to import QWidget from PySide Qt widgets. So let's do QWidget. And we'll set up our class. The class is going to be named rockWidget. It is going to be inheriting from QWidget. And it is going to have a constructor. So let's make sure we put that in. And for example, we can give it a window title. Let's say self set window title, and we are going to call this rockWidget. And now that we have this, notice that we did just the minimum we needed to have this be a valid Python class here. So we can come back to main.py and import. We're going to say from rockWidget import rockWidget. And we want to create a QWidget component. This time we will create a rockWidget. We can do something like this. Now that we have this, we can run. Let's see if this actually works. And if we run, we should see the same thing we saw before. But now this is not an instance of QWidget. It is an instance of rockWidget which itself inherits from the QWidget class. Now that we have this, we can start doing all kinds of crazy things on top of this QWidget component. What can we do? For example, we can set up a bunch of buttons. Let's do that. We will also import QPushButton. Okay, we already know QPushButton. Let's say button 1 equals QPushButton and say button 1. We can do this. If I can type. What are we going to see when we run this application? Let's try to run it. We are instantiating an object of rock widget in main.py, remember? And we want to see where this button is going to show up in our user interface. That's a question you might have. Let's try to run. And if we do this, you see that we don't see our button, but we set it up in our code. The reason this is happening is that this widget doesn't know where to put the button. And to put things inside our widgets or our window, we need to use layout. And a layout is a way, let's try to draw this so that it is really easy to understand. Now we have our widget component and we put our button in our code here to attempt to put some kind of button in our user interface. But this widget component doesn't know how to lay them out. There is a way in Qt you can tell a widget to lay things out either vertically, okay, something like this, or horizontally from left to right. And you do that using layout. Let's start with a horizontal layout to start out. We have a class which is called QHBoxLayout, and it is a way we have to lay things out horizontally in our class. And to do that, you set up an object of that class. We are going to say layout or button layout. Okay, we can do something like this, and it is going to be a QHBoxLayout component. Okay, once we have the layout, we can add things to this layout. So let's say button layout, add widget. And you see we have a bunch of methods. You can add other layouts inside this layout. You can add a child widget. But in this case, we are just interested in adding a widget, which is going to be our button 1. So please make sure you really understand the flow of things here. We have our parent widget, and we want to put things inside this widget using this layout here. Once we have our widget in the layout, now we can call the setLayout method on the widget to let it use this layout component to lay things out inside the widget component here. So we're going to say self set layout, and we are going to say button layout. We can do this. Now if we run, we should see our button inside our widget. And if we do this, you see that we have button 1 here, and this is really cool. Now that we have this infrastructure in place, we can add other buttons. So for example, we can go down and copy this. I think we can do that. Control Alt down. This is going to copy this in Visual Studio Code, and we can name this to button 2. Okay, and we can add a widget again. Control Alt down. This is going to copy the line, and we can say button 2 here. And now we can go down and try to run. We should have 2 buttons, button 1 and button 2, and you can keep going, putting in as many buttons as you want. Another thing I want you to see is that you can lay things out even vertically. So we can change this to be a vertical layout. Let's do that. QVBoxLayout. And we can change this to be a QVBoxLayout. This is all we need to do. And because this is a vertical layout, now when we add these buttons here, they are going to be added in vertical order. Let's try to run. Button 1 should be on top. Button 2 should be below. Let's run again. And we have this here, and this is really cool. Now you can see that we can use this widget, and this is really the idea I was trying to convey here, as a base on top of which we can build other complex user interfaces, and we will be doing a lot of that in the course here. Right now we are just laying the foundation so that you really understand what is going on under the hood. Now that we have these buttons, we can really do all kinds of crazy things. For example, we can set up a bunch of slots that are going to be activated whenever we click on these buttons. Now you already know how to do these things, but now we are going to be putting in these methods as part of this class. They are going to be methods of this class here. So for example, we can say def button 1, and when it is clicked, we are going to print a message saying button 1 clicked. Okay, we can do something like this. We can even copy this method code. I think we can do that. Okay, so let's do that and do that for button 2 clicked. And we are going to say button 2 clicked. And we can connect signals to these slots that we are setting up here. The way you do that, you come down, say button 1, you already know this. If it is clicked, okay, we want to connect to a signal, to a slot, and that's going to be self button 1 clicked. We have this for button 1, we can duplicate this for button 2. So we can select the line, Shift Alt down. This is going to copy the line in Visual Studio Code. That's why I love Visual Studio Code. And we can put the code here to duplicate it. And we are going to say button 2 clicked. Now we have the connection from these buttons to the slots we have down here. If you click on button 1, you should see this message. If you click on button 2, you should see this message. Let's view terminal. And we are going to try and run again, but we have the previous application instance running. So we can kill it and run again. And if it runs, watch what happens below here. Okay, so let's click on button 1. Button 1 clicked. What is going on here? The problem is that we are setting these methods up as methods of the class, but we're not telling these methods that they belong to this class here. You do that by passing in the self argument. Sorry for that. So let's do self, and I think at this moment this should work. Let's clear and run again. And if we click on button 1, it's going to say button 1 clicked. If we click on button 2, it is going to say button 2 clicked. If you wanted, you could change this to be laid out horizontally by using QH box layout. That is going to lay out things horizontally. If you run again, they are going to be laid out horizontally. If you click, button 1 clicked. If you click, button 2 clicked. This is really all I wanted you to see in this lecture. Again, if you don't know what QH box layout and QV box layout do, I invite you to use the documentation. Let's do that, QV box layout. And you are going to have a lot of information about these things. You can really read this if this is your first time. You are going to pick up a lot of information, and this is going to be very helpful in your career as a Qt for Python developer. We are going to stop here in this lecture, and I will see you in the next one. In this lecture, we are going to explore the QMainWindow class. This is a class that allows us to work with things like menus, toolbars, status bars, actions, and it is really cool. What this is going to give us is a window like this, but a window that has little parts or components that we can customize. For example, in many applications, at least graphical user interface applications, we have something like a toolbar or a menu bar on top. And below that, we might have a toolbar that contains things we can click on to make things happen. After that, we are going to have something like a main or a central widget. And in that widget, we are going to put in the main component of our application. If it is an editor or a text processing application, users will be able to type things in this component and things like that. We might even have a status bar, something we can use to show some messages or whatever. You can design your applications reusing these components that are built into the QMainWindow class that you can instantiate in your Qt applications. So this is what we are going to do here. We will create a class that is going to be building on top of QMainWindow, and on top of that, we will be doing our own things. And you're going to see that we will have the ability to add menu bars, toolbars, status bars, and that's going to be really cool. Once we have this class inherited, we can add menus like we see here. So we can call the menu bar function on QMainWindow, and this is going to give us a menu bar object that we can manipulate. Once we have it, we can add other menus. For example, you see here we are adding a file menu, and the add menu method is going to give us a menu object that we can use to manipulate our menu here. For example, we can add actions to our menu, and we are doing that right here. And this is going to give us an action we can manipulate later in our Qt applications. I realize this is a bit convoluted, but actions are a thing that you can use to manipulate a user doing something in your application. Suppose we have a quick action like this, and we want the user to be able to trigger this either from the menu bar or the toolbar. So the user could go in a file menu and select quit, or they can go on the toolbar directly and click quit. The way Qt does this, it adds in an intermediary step through which you can go to trigger this action. And this is what this action is. An action is an object that you can either add to the toolbar or the menu bar. And when the user tries to quit either through the menu or the toolbar, all these things are going to go through the same action, and you can connect this action to a method that is going to do things in your Qt application. And you don't have to duplicate your code either in the menu bar or in the toolbar. I am going to show you this when we hit Visual Studio Code if it is not making sense yet. But this is a really good design when it comes to the Qt framework. So we have the action here, and this is the action that we will be connecting slots to. For example, you can see whenever this action is triggered, this is a signal that is emitted by Q action. You can go in the documentation to check this out. When this action is triggered, we will call a method called quit, and this is going to quit our application as you are about to see. Again, the meat of this here is to show you how you can manipulate menus in your Qt applications. Once you have the menu bars, you can add menus to that menu bar. And once you add a menu, you will have a menu object you can add actions to. We are repeating the same process here. We are adding an edit menu. And in this edit menu, we will add actions to copy, cut, paste, undo, and redo. And we will be seeing these things in our user interface. And if we really wanted, we could grab these actions and connect slots to them to do things in our application. And I think we will even do an application like this later in the chapter here. So stay tuned for that. Down here, you see that we have a bunch of other menus. We have Windows settings, help. We can do these things. Another thing we can do is also manipulate the toolbar, and you do that by setting up a toolbar object like you do here. Once you have the toolbar, you're going to add that to the main window using this method here. And you can add actions to the toolbar. You see, we are adding an action, and before we add the action, we're going to create it. So this is how you create your action. You can put in a bunch of things, and you can connect slots to the action. This is really what we are doing here. Another thing I want you to see is that you can even pass an icon when you create the action, and this icon is going to show up wherever you add that action in your user interface, and this is really cool. Down here, we are adding a separator in our toolbar, and we are even adding a push button in our toolbar. You can do that if you want. It is possible. Let's see how you can also use status bars. To use the status bar, you set the status bar on your main window using the setting we have here. And we are creating a status bar object in place and passing that in. Down below, you see that we are doing a button that is going to be showing up as our central widget. And once we show this, we are going to see the entire application here. And this is really cool. Down here, we have our methods that are going to respond whether we click on buttons or things in the toolbar, all the menu bars, and you see the method here. You also see the method to quit. And once you have these things, your application is going to work. Now that you have this, we can head over to Visual Studio Code and play with us step by step. Okay, here we are in our Visual Studio Code editor. We have an empty folder that we are going to be using to do whatever we do in this lecture here. Let's drag and drop this on top of Visual Studio Code, and we will create our main.py file. On top of this, we will also create a main window file. Let's do that. And this is going to be where we create our main window class. The first thing we want to do is to make sure we have the correct imports. So we are importing Q application and Q main window. We will need to pass an application object to this window to be able to quit. You're going to see how we wire these things up. But for now, just put Q application here. Let's go down and set up our class. It is going to be nothing really special. The class is going to be called main window. It's going to be inheriting from Q main window. Let's make sure you can see that. It is going to be inheriting from Q main window here. We are doing our constructor thing, and we have a member which is called app, which is going to be the application instance that created this main window here. And we will be using this application member to quit the application. Again, you will see how we use these things in a minute. Now we have a main window object. I think we can go in the main.py file and try to use this. So let's go down and put that in here. It is not going to be anything special. We have Q application imported. We are importing main window from our main window file, the class we just set up here. And we are creating a window, which is main window. We are showing it, and we are kicking off the event loop. Nothing special here. So let's show the terminal window to be able to run this. And we are going to say Python main.py. And if we do this, we will see a window pop up here. But you may think this is a normal widget, Daniel. Why all the fuss around QMain window? Let me show you. We are going to go back to main window here. And we are going to put in a piece of code like this. Okay, so this is going to be setting up our menu bar. So we will call the menu bar method on our main window object, and it is going to give us a menu bar that we can use to add menus to our main window object here. And again, how do I know this? The documentation. Let's go back to our browser, and we can say QMain window here, QMain window. And if we look here, we can see a method called menu bar. You can see that right here. And they are going to say whatever this method does. It is going to return the menu bar for the main window. This function creates and returns an empty menu bar if the menu bar does not exist. So we are going to create it, and we can go through these menu bars to add menus to our main window. This is really cool, right? So we are calling add menu to our menu bar object. Again, we can go to the documentation and see what we get from this guy. This is going to return a Q menu bar, okay? And this is why I don't like the documentation for Qt for Python. There should be a link for Q menu bar you can click on to go there, but we have to go back and search here. So let's do Q menu bar, and we can open this in our browser. Once you see this, you're going to see that we can do a lot of things. And one of these is add a menu. And this is what we are using in our application here to add a menu called file on our menu here. Let's run and see our menu live. Let's clear properly and run Python main.py. If we do that, look at what we have here. We have a menu. We can click on it to do things, but it doesn't have anything inside yet. But we're going to fix this in a minute. Let's close the application first. But what we can say, for example, is file menu, okay, file menu, add action, and we are going to say something like quit. If we do this and run and come back to our window here, if we click on file, you see we have a quit. We can add menu options in our menus, and this is really cool. Okay, another thing we can do is actually grab this action and use it to respond whenever the user triggers this action. For example, we can say quit action. Okay, we can name this quit action, and we can connect to it and make a slot respond whenever this action here is triggered. And this is really cool. So let's go down and define a quit method. So let's go down here and say def quit app, for example. And it's a method, so we need to pass self here. And down below, we are going to say app quit. And can we quit? So we're going to say quit. Autocomplete is not helping here, but I think this is going to work. So let's go with this. And once we have the action, we can connect this slot to it. So we can say quit action triggered, connect, and we will connect the self method that is called quit app. Let's see what happens if we do this. And this is really cool if it's going to work. Let's clear and run the application. Now we have our file menu, and if we hit quit, the application is going to go away. Let's start it again. File, quit, it is going to go away. And this is really cool. We can add a bunch of other menus now that you know how to work with add menu and add actions on menus. So to populate this, I am going to add an edit menu. And let's take out these ampersand symbols because we don't want to go into that here. They have some use in Qt, but we're not going to go into that here. Now we have another menu added to our menu bar, and we are going through this menu to add copy, cut, paste, undo, redo menu options. And we will see them in our user interface if we run the application. Let's go to view terminal and clear and run our application. If we do that, we have an edit menu. This is really cool. If we click on it, copy, cut, paste, undo, redo, and this is really cool. You can do these things using the QMain window class in Qt for Python. Let's add a bunch of other menus to make this a little bit interesting. We have window, we have settings, we have help, and let's add a comment here. If we run, let's see if we can see these things. showing up on our user interface, and we see our thing here, and this is really cool. Now I hope you know how to work with menus and menu options, and you even know how to respond when one of your menu options is triggered. Now let's focus on toolbars. The first thing we do is to create a toolbar object and set a few properties on that. And before we create a toolbar, we need to import the toolbar and the QSize class here we are using to give it the icon size. The size object here is coming from Qt Core, so let's put that in. And if you want to know how I knew that, how did I know that QSize is coming from Qt Core? Well, you have to use the documentation. And if we go back to our browser, I really want you to be familiar with using the documentation because it is an invaluable skill, QSize, for Qt for Python or PySide6. And if we look for it, they should tell us where this thing lives. QSize, you see, it lives in the Qt Core module. That's how I know these things, because I don't memorize them. So we have this imported. I think we can import QToolbar from Qt widgets because that's the module where it lives. We don't even need Q application imported here because we don't need this. So let's take this out. I think this is going to work. And we can go down and keep working on our toolbar here. Once we have the toolbar, we can add in a bunch of actions. So to start, let's say toolbar, add action, and add in our quit action. How about that? We can add the quit action to the toolbar, and you do that by saying toolbar, add action, and let's say quit action because I think we have it on top. Quit action. Where is our quit action? I think we have it right here. We can copy it and put that down below here. I think this is going to work. Let's see what happens if we run this application. This is going to be really interesting, and this is going to explain why we have Q actions in Qt. So let's see our toolbar. You can see our action right here. And if we go in file, you are also going to see that we have a quit thing set up here. But we are managing what happens when a user triggers this action in one place. Whenever this action is triggered, we are going to call the quit app, but we can trigger this action from different places in our application. And we can either do that from the menu or from the toolbar. If we quit from the menu, the application is going to die. If we quit from the toolbar, the application is going to die, and we have one single method to respond to all those possible sources of this action being triggered, and I really hope this makes sense. So let's go down and keep playing with our toolbar here. Another thing we can do is create our own action, just like we do here. Action 1, Q action, we are giving it some information and a parent because its constructor requires this information. Again, I know this because I read the documentation. So go in the documentation, read the information for Q action, and you will know why we need to do things like we do here. Now we need to import Q action. Q action lives in the Qt GUI module, so we will import that like we do here. And if we go down, our application should be happy. Now that we have the action, we can pass a lot of information. For example, we can pass a status tip, and this is something that is going to pop up when you hover over your action. We can do something like this. We can respond when this action is triggered, and this is going to be a method we set up in our application. And after we have the action ready, we can add it in our toolbar, just like we added our quit action on top here, and this is really cool. Before we run, let's go down and actually set up this method. So let's copy and say def, and we will pass self as a parameter. We will go in the body of the method, and we can print a message saying action 1 triggered. Okay, we can do something like this. Now that we have this, let's make sure it is the same name we are using here. Action 1 triggered. Yeah, or we can even say action triggered. This is going to do. Let's run the application. Okay, we have some action added to our toolbar. If we click on it, we're going to see that our action is triggered. So you can respond to things happening in your toolbar, and this is really cool. We can even set up another action, but before we do, let's go to the place where our source code is, and we will add in an image because we want to pass an icon to our action here and make it show up in our user interface. You can download the source code and have access to this start image here. Okay, so you can use this. Let's go back to our code and we can go down and set up another action. This action is going to be taking up an icon, and I think icon is coming from the Qt GUI module. So let's say Q icon. I think we have that imported here. So we can do this. And if we set up this thing, we can pass our start PNG icon. It is in our project. We just pasted this in here, and we can pass the icon on top of the other pieces of information that we passed earlier. So we have some text that we pass in our action. We have a parent. We can pass the status tip message here, and we can respond when this thing is clicked. And again, this is going to activate our slot here that we set up. We can make this thing checkable. And to be honest, I don't remember what this does, but we're going to figure this out when we run this. And we are going to add this to our toolbar. Let's try to run this and see what the checkable thing does. Okay, so we can run this and we have our thing showing up here. We see this thing is triggered and the checkable thing is not helping out in this moment. I think we can comment it out and see what happens. This is how you learn about these things. Okay, so let's resize this. And if you click, you see this thing is triggered. I think the checkable thing here is working in the same way as we saw for push button. So we're not going to be talking about this anymore here. If you want to see the signals that are sent by a Q action, again, we can go to the documentation and look for Q action. Let's do that. Q action in Qt for Python. You can read all you can about this class. If we go down, hopefully we're going to see the signals that it emits. You see it has a triggered signal and it can pass a parameter, which may be useful if you have set the checkable state here. I think that's the use for that. So you have this. Now you can read the documentation on Q action and know all you can do with it. Now I think we know how to work with toolbars. Let's see how we can work with the status bar. And the status bar is this little section below your window. I think we should show this. It is this little thing below in which you can show a bunch of messages. And we're going to show how this works in a minute. So let's go back to the code. But before we go to status bars, I just remembered something I didn't show you. We can add a separator to separate things in our toolbar. And we can even add a widget, something like a push button in the toolbar. And this is really cool. If this is helpful for whatever you are building with Qt for Python, please take advantage of that. Let's import Q push button for that to work. So Q push button, and let's go down and make sure we have no more squiggles. So we have the thing here. Let's run and see what this gives us. And you can see that you can even add a button. Okay, if you look closely, you're going to see that we have a separator here. So you can separate things in your toolbars. Now let's go and work on status bars. And all you have to do to work with the status bar is to set a status bar object to your main window. So we use the set status bar method here, and we will create the object in place and set that as our own status bar. Status bar is in the Qt widgets module. So let's add that here, Q status bar. And once we have it, we can start showing things in the status bar. What we are going to do is to set a message to the status bar. So let's go in our slot. So let's go in our slot that responds when the toolbar button is clicked. So we're going to say self status bar, and we are going to say show message. This is a method you can use to show a piece of message, and you can pass the message. So message from my app. Let's say that. And you need to specify a timeout. You can specify, you can leave this empty. Let's first see what happens if you leave this empty. So let's do that. If you click, it's going to say message from my app. And you can see that if you click on this, the message in the status bar is going to change. And another thing that is wired in Qt is that if you hover over something that has a tooltip message, that tooltip is going to show up in the status bar. That's what you see here. But if you click, you see that our message is going to show up and it is not going to go away. It's going to stay there as long as you are hovering over the thing. You can pass a timeout parameter here. So let's say we want to wait for this for 3 seconds. 3000 milliseconds. This is what we mean here. So we can run the application again. If we run it and click on our thing, the message is going to show up, but it should go away in 3 seconds, and it does go away. So click 1, 2, 3, and it is going to go away after 3 seconds. And these are things you can really do with your QMain window class. We saw that we could use it to play with menus and menu bars. We played with toolbars, and we later played with status bars. Another thing you can do with our application to make it a little less boring is to put some button in the middle as a central widget. And we are setting up the button here. And we are going to set up a method that is going to respond when this thing is clicked, when the button is clicked here. So let's make sure this is aligned properly. And we want it to respond when it is clicked. So let's put our method here. We are going to define a method. Let's say def. And we are going to give it a name, and we want to go inside and put some message out. Clicked on the button. You can do something like this, and this is going to be our central widget, and we want to mark this as a method. And if we show the terminal and run, we should see a button in the middle of our application, and if you click on it, you're going to see the message here. And this is really all I wanted you to see in this lecture. I apologize, it turned out to be really long, but QMain window is really interesting. Now you know how to add menus to your application, you know how to work with the toolbar, and you know how to add status bar messages to your application. The toolbar is very flexible. I think you can even move it. So you see, you can move it around in your application. You can play with us. It is really cool. We are going to stop here in this lecture, and I will see you in the next one. In this video, we will learn about the QMessageBox class. And this is a class that allows us to set up transient temporary message windows like this. You can see something like this. It has a title, it has a message inside, and we have two buttons, one to accept and one to reject. And it can really be any kind of message. And QMessageBox allows us to set up something like this. In Qt, there are different ways to do this. And we will start by looking at the hard way to do this. And here is a simple function that is going to do this. We will set up a QMessageBox object, and through a bunch of method calls, we will apply a bunch of properties to our MessageBox object. So we can give it a title, we can give it the message to show, we can really do all kinds of crazy things. But one other good thing I want you to notice is that you can control the type of message box this is going to be by changing the icon here. So you can make it a critical message box, you can make it a warning message box. You're going to see what all these things mean here. Another thing you can do is specify the buttons that are going to show up on your message box. So in this case, we want to see an OK and cancel button, but it is also possible to put in other buttons if you want to. You can just keep ORing those types of button in these parentheses and they will show up. We will also set the default button. So the OK button is going to be on by default, or it's going to be highlighted, if I can say it like that. Once we have the message box object set up, we will show it, and we show it by calling the exec method. This is going to make it pop up on the screen, and we will grab whether the user pressed OK or cancel through this return variable. So if the value of this is QMessageBox OK, we will know that the user chose OK. If it is something else, we will note that the user has chosen cancel. And if you pop up this message box, you will see all this kind of information here. I know this may be cryptic if this is the first time you work with something like this, but I will show you how this works in a minute when we hit Visual Studio Code. So this is the hard way to do things. Qt provides a bunch of static methods you can call on QMessageBox to show different kinds of message boxes. And it's really simple to trigger. All you have to do is say QMessageBox critical, and this is going to give you a critical message box. You can pass in the parent, you can pass in the title, the message, and the kinds of buttons this thing is going to show. Okay, once this thing shows up and the user chooses either of these buttons, you will know through this return variable that we are setting up here. And we will do the usual check we do to know whether the user pressed OK or cancel. So this is one kind. We can also have information message boxes, and you can really see that what is changing here is the method you call. If you call the information method, you will get an information message box. If you call the critical method, you will get a critical message box. And we can keep going on, really going through them all. We have a warning one, we have an about message box. And here you see how you can trigger those message boxes. What we will do is set up a bunch of buttons in our user interface. And whenever you click on one of these buttons, we're going to trigger a different kind of message box. So this one is going to trigger the message box we set up the hard way. The second one here is going to trigger a critical message box, and we will keep going until we hit the about message box, as you see down here. And here is how our buttons are going to look. So nothing complicated here. But one thing you should notice is that we are using a vertical layout to lay these guys out how you see them here. So we're going to do this in a minute when we hit Visual Studio Code. So let's head over to the editor and actually do this. So here we are in our editor, Visual Studio Code. We will set up a new project and we will be working in this folder called message box. You can see that it is an empty folder. We can drag it and drop it on top of Visual Studio Code to open it here. And we will create our main Py file. And we need a widget file that is going to be containing our widget. We will set up our widget class like we do any other widget. So we will import the components we need and we will set up a widget class here. Once we have this, we can head over in our main.py file and put in the code that is going to trigger that widget. I think at this point we can actually run to see that our application actually works, and then we can start building other things we need. Let's clear and say Python main py, and if we do this, we should see a window pop up here, and we will build our user interface on top of this. The first thing I'm going to do in our widget class is initialize the buttons that we will be using in our constructor. So let's do something like this, and I am going to just put them in, and we will be looking at the meaning of this as we go through the lecture here. So we are setting up a window title for the widget here, and we want to set up a bunch of buttons. We have a hard button that is going to trigger the message box we set up the hard way. We have a critical button, a question button, an information button, a warning button, and an about button. And each of these buttons is going to be triggering a different kind of message box to kind of learn about all these things here. Once we have the buttons, if we run the application, remember, we're not going to see them because we need to tell this widget class how it's going to be laying out all these buttons here. But let's try and show you what is going to happen if you try to run the application at this point. If you do, it's really not going to work. But here it is just complaining about the slots that we don't have in place. But the point is that this is not going to show the buttons the way we want them shown. So we need to use a bunch of layouts here. And you can see that I imported a VBox layout because I have a purpose for this. Okay, so let's go down and set up our layout. You already know about layouts here. We will set up a vertical layout. And once we have the layout, we will be adding all these buttons to the layout. Then we will set the layout to the current widget here. This is how we are doing this. Let's say that we are setting up the layouts here. And let's see if we try to run. We are probably going to get a problem because we don't have the methods in, but we can set up all these methods here. So what I am going to do is copy this and go all the way to the bottom. So this is our constructor. We can go down below and set up the method. And I am going to duplicate this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. So let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and this is going to be critical. Let's do that. Okay, the second one is going to be critical. The third one is going to be question. I am doing this live so that you guys don't have a problem with what I am doing here. So let's do this together. Question, information. Let's do this. So let's go down and do information. We're going to paste this in, and this is going to say information. And we're going to go to the warning button. So this is the slot we need to set up after information. So let's do this warning. And we need to go to the last one, which is going to be about. Okay, so let's do about. And this is going to say about. And let's try to fix our indentation here, because Python is very serious about this. So we need to use one tab space after the line of the function definition here. Let's go to view and show terminal. And if we do this and run again, this should run now, and it is going to show our buttons. We have done the signal slot connections after the definition of each button. So at this point, if we click on hard, we should see hard. If we click on critical, we should see critical. If we click on question, we should see question. And let's make sure that everything is working here, and about is about. Now we need to show a bunch of message boxes, and we will start by the hard way here. So let's take out the text we have in our function or method, and I will go on top and say that we are doing things the hard way here. And I am going to put in my function definition. What this is going to do, it's going to create a message box object, and you can check this class out in the documentation. You already know how to do that, but let's do it together anyway. So let's say PySide6 Q message box. This is going to open the page for this class in the Qt documentation, and you can click on more to read on what this class does. This is going to display a primary text to alert the user to a situation, and you can really read all you want about this. This is how it looks on the Mac. This is how you set it up, and it is what we are basically doing in our example here. Okay, let's come back to our code. We will set up the message box object. We will give it a size. We want it to have a minimum size of 700 in width and 200 in height. This is the meaning here. We can give it a window title. We can give it the text to show. We can give it some informative text. We can give it an icon. We're going to make it a critical message box. And we can give it the buttons that it is going to show. And after this, we will specify the default button. And the critical thing here is to show the message box. Okay, and you do that by calling the exec method on this. Once you call the exec method, the message box is going to show up. And when the user clicks on either of the buttons, we will know which button the user clicked on through the return value here. So if the user clicks on OK, we will get a number representing the OK button. If they click on cancel, we will get a number representing the cancel button. This is how these things work. Now that we have this, I think we can run and see it in action. We're going to show our terminal window, and we will run. Okay, we are going to click on the hard button, and if we do that, we're going to see something pop up here. So we have a message box here, and if we click back on our code, let's make sure you see what all these things mean. You see the title we set up is showing up here. Okay, you see the informative text is showing up here, and the message we set up is showing up here, and you see the buttons we set up. To try and play with this, you can click on cancel. It is going to say user chose cancel. If you click on OK, you can see that we know which button the user clicked upon. But you can even play with this. For example, let's take out the cancel button in our standard buttons here. So let's take this out. And if we run, let's run again, okay, and click on hard, we're going to see that we only have the OK button. Okay, so, and this is really cool. Now you know that you can use these standard buttons to control which buttons show up in your message boxes. And this is one way to set up a message box. If you want, you can do it this way. But Qt provides a rather easier way to do this because all the work here is really repetitive. It is just setting up these messages, the title, the text, the informative text, and really the differentiating factor is the kind of icon you apply to the message box. Let's change this to warning, for example, to show you that you can do this. So we can change the icon to change the kind of message box this is going to show. Let's try to run again. So we can run, and if we hit, this is going to show a different icon. Let's cancel out of this and change this back to what it was. Let's hit Control Z to go back there. It was a critical one. Let's try again. And if we hit hard, we're going to see that we have a different icon. So they are different in which icons they show. The rest is really the same. So because of this reason, Qt provides a bunch of easier to use static methods that you can call directly to get this thing show up without doing all the repetitive work here. We will start by the critical one because it is what we have here, and I am just going to put in the code. All you have to do to get this to work is to say QMessageBox.critical and call the critical method on the QMessageBox class, and then you pass in the parent, the title, the message you want to show, and the buttons you want the message box to have. This is really all you have to do. The rest is the same. We will check which button the user clicked through the return value of the critical method here. And if it is equal to the number that represents QMessageBox OK, we will know that the user chose OK. If it is another value, we will note that the user didn't choose OK and they chose cancel because we only have two buttons here. Or they just closed the message box. That's another option too. Let's run and make sure we see what is happening here. We will click on the critical button. We can show our terminal and run again. And if we click on critical, you see that we have a really good message box here. Again, you can see the title we set on top here. You can see the message and you can see our buttons here. Let's go down and try the other ones. If we choose cancel, you see that it is cancel. If we choose OK, you see that it is OK down here. And this is working exactly as we want. The rest is really the same. All we are going to be changing is the kind of method we call. So we can go down and do the question one. Let's put some space in here and put in the code for the question message box. And we are calling the question method. The value is going to be captured in the return value, and we will check which button the user chose here. Let's run and see this running. So we can show this question, asking the question. We can click OK. We're going to now, if we click OK, we can click on cancel on question, and we will note that we have chosen cancel. I am just going to go down and put in the rest of the methods. Then I am going to show you this running so that you have a full working example on these guys here. Okay, so let's go down and put in the information one. So we call the information method. We can go down and put in the warning one. Let's do that. And we can go down and put in the about message box here. All of these are things you can do. I think it is better to also document this. Let's say about here. We can go on top here and say warning. We can go on top here and say information, and on top here we will say question, and we will go to the top and say critical. And here the hard way was critical as well. Okay, we have the thing, and now if we run, all these buttons should work. Let's bring up our terminal window. We can clear so that we have a clean slate here. If we run, we should see our thing show up. If we click on hard, we will see a message box. We click on critical, we see a message box. We click on question, we see a message box. We click on information, we have an information message box. And be careful to look at the different icons that show up, because that's really the main differentiating factor. We have a warning one. And if we click on about, we will have some message here, and we can click OK and really run this. So the last one doesn't really need to capture the return value because it's just going to give the user a message. So the user can just close the thing. That's why we are seeing cancel even if we click on OK, because the OK we click on is not meant to give us a return value. That's how this thing works. So this is really all I had to share in this lecture. Again, if you want to learn more about QMessageBox, you are welcome to read the documentation here. You see they document the kinds of message boxes you can look at. But I think we have a good starting point to work with this throughout this lecture here. I am going to stop here, and I will see you in the next lecture. In this lecture, we are going to look at the QPushButton class. And you might say, haven't we used a lot of QPushButtons enough by now? Well, We're going to look at it again because I want you to see more on the signals you can process in your Qt applications on the Q push button component here. So you can process the clicked signal, you can process the pressed signal, you can also process the released signal. The pressed and released signals are going to become increasingly important if, for example, you are doing a drawing application in which you want to know if the user has pressed down and moving without having pressed the release button. So that's why I want you to know about these signals here. And we will set up an application like this. So we will have a button that says click. We will connect to these signals and we will be processing these signals in these slots that we set up below here. And here in the middle, you see that we are setting up a layout to have this button show up better in the widget that we are building here. Now that you know this, we can head over to Visual Studio Code and actually do this. Here we are in our editor, Visual Studio Code. We have an empty folder in which we will be working for this project here. We can drag it and drop it on top of Visual Studio Code. When we do that, we will create a main.py file and we will create our widget file. Once we have the widget file, we will put in our starter code. We will import the components we need and we will set up a class that inherits QWidget. Nothing special here. We will also go into the main file and put in our boilerplate code, if I can say it like that. It is going to create the application object and we will create an instance of our widget object here. We will show it and kick off the event loop. You already know this. Let's go to the widget and set up our button and connect to the signals that we are interested in. But before we do that, we can go to the documentation and actually read a little bit about these signals here. So we can go to Q message box. Now we want to look at Q push button. Sorry for that. Let's go to Q push button. And if you remember, we didn't see the signals that this thing has because most of these signals are coming from the parent class of Q push button. And that happens to be the Q abstract button class. So we can click on this thing here. We will get to the documentation. And if we go down, we will see the slots, but we are interested in the signals. And if you look here, we have the clicked signal. We have used like a gazillion times by now, but we have the pressed signal and the released signal that we are interested in playing with in this lecture here. Another one you can play with is the toggled signal that is going to be triggered whenever you change the state of the button when you have set the button to be checkable, like we have done in a bunch of previous lectures, but we want to be using this signal here. You can play with it if you want. Let's go back to the code and actually do what we want to do. We will come back to our widget class and put in our constructor code. The constructor is going to set the window title. It's going to set up our button, and we will be connecting to different signals from this button here. And you can see that we are trying to process the clicked signal, the pressed signal, and the released signal. And we're going to see how these work. To be able to see this in action, we need to implement these slots here. So let's do that. So we can go down and implement these slots as methods of our class. And we have the clicked slot, which is going to be triggered when you click on the button. We have the pressed slot, which is going to be triggered when we press. And down below, we have the released slot, which is going to be triggered whenever our button is released here. And we have all the code we need. Now that we have this in place, we can show our terminal window and we can clear and run the application. If we do, we should see our button here. And once we see it, we can press on it. You see, we see pressed. Once we go out of the window of our widget, we're going to see that the system is going to think that the button is released. But if we click again and release, you see that we have two signals. When we release the button, we have the released signal. But one thing worth noting here is that the click is both the pressed and the released signal. So a click is going to be triggered when you press and release. But if you want to do things only when you press, you can use the pressed signal, if that is making any sense. That's the meaning of these signals here, and I really wanted you to be aware of this. If you really want to learn more about these signals, you can come to the documentation and see what the official Qt guys are saying about this, but this is the gist of it. This is really all I had to share in this lecture. I hope you found it interesting. We are going to stop here in this one, and I will see you in the next one. In this lecture, we are going to look at the QLabel and QLine edit components in the Qt framework. And these are components that allow us to set up a component like this in which you can type a single line of text. So this is a QLine edit. And a label is something you can use to set up some label text, something like the full name you see here. And if you need these kinds of things in your Qt application, you will be using QLabel and QLine edit. The thing we have down here is also a label, and in the middle we have a button that we will want to be using to show the capabilities of QLine edit here. To set these things up, all you have to do is to create these components wherever you need them in your Qt application. You can create a label just like you do here. You have a variable label and you call the constructor QLabel, and you pass in whatever the label text is going to be. You create a line edit component like this, and we can do all kinds of crazy things. Down here you see that we are trying to connect to a bunch of signals from the line edit, and we will be playing with this thing. But what I want to draw your attention on is how we are going to lay things out to make the user interface show up like this. And what we are going to do, we will first have an englobing vertical layout. Okay, that's what we're going to do. Then we will take the full name, label, and the line edit here and put them in a horizontal layout. So this horizontal layout is going to show up somewhere like here. And then we will set up a vertical layout, which is going to be this one, and add these components to that vertical layout. So the vertical layout is going to have the horizontal layout added to it. And after that, we will add the button and add the label you see down here. I want you to keep this idea in mind because this confuses a lot of people starting out with Qt. Now that we know this, we can look at the signals that we can play with for QLine edit. For example, we can know when the text in the line edit changes. We can know when the cursor position changes. We can know when the user finishes editing, and this mostly means the user hitting enter. We can know when return is pressed, which is also enter. I don't know why Qt provides two signals for this. Maybe there is a difference, but I didn't care enough to go investigate that. We can know when the selection is changed. We can know when the text is edited. We can do all kinds of crazy things. Once we have these components in, we will set up the methods that are going to be triggered by the signals, and you have all of them here. We will play with them in a minute when we hit Visual Studio Code, but I do recommend pausing the video and looking at each of them before we go there so that you have an idea about what we are about to do. Now that we have this out of the way, we are going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with this a little more. Here we are in Visual Studio Code. We are going to be working on this folder here, which is empty, as you can see. We can drag it and drop it on top of Visual Studio Code to open it, and this is going to open our project in the folder. Let's create our main Python file and our widget file. And in the widget file, we will create our class like we always do. Make sure you see the imports we do here because we will be using all these components. We can head over in the main file and put in our code that is going to trigger the widget showing up. And we can try this to see if it actually works. So let's do that. If we show it, we're going to have an empty widget. And now we can put in a bunch of line edits and labels. Before we do, let's go to the documentation and read as much we can about these guys. You can look at QLabel. And if we open this in our browser, this is going to tell you what this component does. It is used for displaying text or an image. We will talk about images later. For now, we are concerned with text. And if you go up, you will see a bunch of methods you can call on this to really do all kinds of crazy things. But this is mostly used to show text in your Qt user interfaces. We can also look at QLine edit and pay special care on the signals that this component has. So if we click on more, we're going to see it shows something like this in your Qt application. You use it to type a single line of text, And you can do all kinds of crazy things. But for now, we will do the basics. One thing I want you to see is the signals that this thing has, because they are the most interesting thing. If you think about it, you use a line edit like this if you want users to type text in. And you may be interested in different aspects of how the user is putting in text. For example, you may be interested in tracking the cursor position. You may be interested in knowing when the user has finished editing so that you can do something with the text. You can do all kinds of crazy things, and we will be playing with a bunch of these signals. If you see some that interest you, I do recommend clicking on them and seeing what they do to really have an idea about these things here. And make sure you read this detailed description to really know about this component even more than I can tell you in a course like this. The documentation is your weapon when it comes to working with Qt, and Qt happens to have one of the best pieces of documentation I have known in my career as a software developer. So let's come back to our code and do what we need to do. The first thing we are going to do is to put in our label and line edit component. Before we do that, we will set up a window title to make this self-descriptive, and we create a label like this. You can see that there is nothing special about this, and we have our line edit. We have made our line edit a member because of the self thing here, and we do that because we want to be accessing this in our member variables. If we don't make it a member like this, we won't be able to access it in our methods, I mean. Okay, we have this in place. I think we will also need another label, which is going to show something like this. Let me show you. We need another label that is going to show the text here, and we need the button. So we can go down and put in our button and make sure it is aligned properly. And we can even go down and put in our label. Once we have these components, the next job is to lay them out. We know that we want the label and the line edit to show up in a horizontal layout, so we will have the label in something like this. Then after that, horizontally, we will have the line edit. So for this, we will be using a horizontal layout. Once we have this horizontal layout, we will use an englobing vertical layout on which we will be adding the button. Okay, so let me display it like this, and the label like this. So this is the user interface we want to set up, and we will first set up this horizontal layout here. So let's come down and set up our horizontal layout. It is going to be a QH box layout. We already know that. And on this layout, we will be adding our label, which is on top here, and the line edit. Once we have this, we will set up a vertical layout, which in turn is going to contain everything in our user interface here. And we will apply the vertical layout on the entire widget. Let's do this. So we can go down and put in our vertical layout, QV box layout. And to be able to do this, you need to have imported all these components here. So we add our horizontal layout to make it show up first in our vertical layout. So if this is our vertical layout, the first thing is going to be the horizontal layout. The second thing is going to be the button. And the last thing is going to be the text holder label here. Once we have the vertical layout, we can apply it to our widget. And to do that, you say self set layout, and we will be using v layout here. Once we do this, we should have our user interface, and the next thing will be to play with our line edit component here. Let's show the terminal window so that we can run the application. If we run, we should see our user interface here. Let's make sure you can see it because I just closed it by accident. We can resize it. Okay, we have the full name on the left because it is what we say in our horizontal layout here. We have the line edit here, we have the button, and we have our label here, which we are going to play with in a minute. You can play with the line edit and really type in whatever you want. You can say the sky is blue, my friend. And you can really do all kinds of crazy things. One thing you might be interested in when you have a component like this is to grab the data. And we will be grabbing the data in our line edit and printing that to the console when the user clicks on the grab data button here. So the first thing we're going to do is come back to our code and set up a method. And the method is going to be at this level. So let's make sure we take this to the correct indentation in Python. So this is going to be triggered whenever the user clicks on our button that says grab data. And what we are going to do, we will grab the text in the line edit. Notice that we are saying self line edit, and this is going to be grabbing this component here, the line edit that we set up in our user interface. And we can call the text method to grab whatever text is currently in the line edit component. So all we need to do now is to do our connection. We can say button clicked, connect, self button click. We already know this. This must be becoming second nature here. Let's run and see this in action. We can open the terminal. We can run the application. It is already running, I think. So let's close it. We're going to run it again to run the new version of the application. And we can say the sky is blue. If we grab data, we will see that the full name is the sky is blue, but we can put in something like Jon Snow. And if we grab data, it's going to say full name is Jon Snow. You can see that we can grab data in our line edit component. This is really cool. If you wanted, you can take this text and actually apply it to the other line edit we have down below here. Let's play with this to really show you that you can do that. So we can close, and we will grab the name of the other line edit. And what is that? Text holder label. So we can do this. Okay, we can copy it and go in our method, and we can say set text on this guy, and the text is going to be what we get from the line edit here. So we can copy this and put that in here. This is something you can do. You can really play with these things, and I do encourage that. Let's make sure the application is not running. We can run again. Okay. And if we say Jon Snow in our line edit and grab data, we will see this print on the terminal because we are printing here, but we will see that the text in our other label here is also going to change to Jon Snow. You can keep playing with this. Let's say Daniel Gray, and grab data. It's going to say Daniel Gray, and it is really working. This is one way you can use a line edit. You can grab the text in the line edit and use it to do whatever it is you want to do in your Qt application. Let's play with the other signals we have on our component here. For example, we can respond whenever the text in our line edit changes. Let's go back to our line edit, which is down here. Let's put in some space so that we can easily spot it. We are going to set up a connection. We are going to say whenever the text changes in our line edit, what we are saying here, we want to trigger the text change method. And we can grab the current text and show it. Before we do that though, let's go in our other thing and comment out the line that prints the text. Because we are going to be printing a lot of things, we don't want to be confused by this. Let's go and put in the slot that is triggered whenever the text changes. So we can go down and actually do that. Okay, we have our text changed slot, and it is going to be triggered whenever the text changes. You see, we commented out the print line here. We just want to see the changes in our user interface, and this is okay. Let's show the terminal and run. And if we say Daniel Gray in here, you see, whenever we type something, we will be notified and we will be responding in our slot here. And this is something you might be interested in doing. If you want, you can even uncomment the line that prints something and run again. If you do that, you will see the changes both in the user interface and on the terminal here, because that's where we are printing with the print statement here. This is what the text changed signal does. We can comment out the connection here because we still have a lot to play with. So let's do that. We might also be interested in knowing when the cursor position changes, and we can set up a connection like this to be notified. And we need to set up this slot that is going to respond, the slot right here. The cursor position method is going to have two parameters. One is going to be the old position, the other is going to be the new position. And how do I know this? Well, the documentation. Let's go back to the documentation or Q line edit, and we can see cursor position changed. You can see that it has two arguments. One is the old position, the other is going to be the new position. But the Qt documentation didn't care enough to name these things properly. Shame on you, Qt. This is bad. You should name these things properly. Let's go back to our code though. So we will do better. Old, new. We will know that this is the old position and this is the new position. And because of the connection we did here, we will have access to these guys when this slot is triggered. So we will be printing these things here. Let's make sure we don't have anything else we don't want to see printed. We have the other connection commented out. I think this is going to do what we want. Let's go up and run. So we can run this. And if we do, you see the cursor position changing as we add things. If we go back, you see the cursor position is also changing. This is really cool. And at each trigger of the method, we have the old position and the new position, and this is really cool. This is something you can do with this method here. Let's go up and comment it out. We might be interested in knowing when the editing is finished. This is another signal we have on the line edit component. We will put in this method here. So we can go all the way to the bottom and put in that method. And let's make sure we remove spaces we don't need. And we have the connection in. This is going to be triggered whenever the editing finishes. And this is going to be mostly when the user hits enter on the line edit after typing in some text. Let's show our terminal window and we can go up and run. And if we say DDD and hit enter, this is going to say that editing is finished. You see, this is triggered when you hit enter. This is all you can do with this signal here. We also have the return pressed signal. Let's put in the connection for that and comment out what we had before. Okay, and this is going to do the same thing as editing finished. Again, I don't know why Qt provides these two. Maybe they have a difference, but honestly, I don't know that difference yet. Let's put in this method implementation. That's going to be return pressed. We can go to the bottom and put this in return pressed. If we run, we should see that if we type DDD or whatever you type in your line edit and you hit enter, you will know that return is pressed. And again, it's when you hit enter after you finish putting in some text in your line edit here. Another interesting signal is one that lets you know when the selection changes in your line edit. You might be interested in this in your Qt application. So when the user does something like this and selects, okay, you will be notified of the current selection, and this is interesting in some applications. So we have the connection in. All we need to do now is put in the implementation for this method here. So let's do that. We can go all the way to the bottom and put in the method implementation. Selection changed. We have the connection. Whenever the selection changes, we call the selected text method to know the currently selected text. And this may be important in your Qt application. So let's do that. We can run this. And whenever we can type in something, let's say, for example, Jon Snow. And if we select John, you see, as we select more things, the currently selected thing is going to be shown here. We just selected John. If we select Snow, we will see that in our Qt application here. If we select the entire thing, even backwards, I think that's going to work. You see, we have Jon Snow selected, and this is really cool. This is something you can do in your Qt applications. The last signal we are going to process is text edited. And as the name says, it is going to be triggered whenever you have text changed in your line edit. And I think it also provides two arguments showing the old text and the new text. To be sure, you can check the documentation. For now, I am just going to put in the implementation here. Let's go to the bottom. Looks like it only gives the new text, which is, yeah, it's useful. So we will be printing the new text here, which is going to be passed to us in this signal here. And this is really cool. Let's try to run. We can clear and run. I think this is going to conflict with other things. No? This is going to do. You see, whenever we change, we have the new text show up, and this is really cool. Let's type in something meaningful. instead of this junk here. So we can say Jon Snow. You can see that whenever we change the text, the changes are going to be reflected in our application here because of the connection we did. And you can go on and play with more signals. I think I gave you enough examples in this lecture here. Again, the goal was to be able to play with QLine edit and QLabel. QLabel is going to be used when you want to show a piece of static text in your user interfaces, something like this. You can use QLine edit when you want your user to type in a line of text. And this may come in handy, for example, if you are setting up a form to collect information from the user. The first name, the last name, the address, the job they do, whatever. You can collect all these things in your Qt applications and do things with them. This is all I had to share in this lecture. I hope you found it interesting. We are going to stop here in this one, and I will see you in the next one.